So, digestive system, okay? I don't know if it's a funny picture or not, but let me ask you this, and this is just a FYI kind of thing. Do you find that taking a child like this into McDonald's and the parent is just giving them Big Macs and stuff, is that child abuse? I don't know. I mean, is it child abuse to do that? And then here's a rhetorical question. If it is child abuse, would you say anything if you saw this? Say anything to the mother? I mean, technically, if you see a mom hitting her kid in the parking lot, would you say anything? But if that's child abuse, and you're saying that this is child abuse, why would that change? Okay? I'm just, it's a rhetorical thing. It's just something to make you wonder, because, you know, you don't want him to get diabetes at, let's say, 9 years old and then die because, you know, he has the diabetes at 12, and then you didn't say anything. You know, it's just a rhetorical thing. Should you say something or not if you're really classifying it as child abuse? Okay? Because we do see this, right? I'm sure everybody here has seen something like this. Maybe not so, you know, so much like a Michelin man, but you have seen things like that. All right, so let's go into the digestive system. And the best way to start is talking about it in very general terms. The way the digestive system is it's a tube, and this tube is called the alimentary canal. From the mouth to the anus, it's 40 feet, okay? Long tube. Now, certain parts of it will actually bulge out like this. Other parts will get very thin and extend further out, okay? But it's one long tube. It could be the stomach, small intestines, and so forth. This is what we call the alimentary canal. Starts with the mouth, goes to the back of the mouth, the pharynx, goes to the esophagus, to the stomach, to the small intestines, the large intestines, the rectum, and finally the poop scoop. Okay? One long tube. 23 feet just in the small intestines. Okay? But then we're also going to have things that feed into the tube. Things like salivary glands, or the liver is going to put some stuff in there, or the gallbladder will put stuff in there, or the pancreas will put stuff in there. These are called accessory organs. The teeth, the tongue, the salivary glands, liver, gallbladder, pancreas. Okay? So that's a very schematic view of what the digestive system is all about. Okay? So you look at this bird's eye view. Now, what I did with you for I think I did it with the circulatory system and introducing the blood flow to go into different parts of the digestive system. Let's do that picture again for you. Now that we're going into it. So this is our mouth, right? We're going to have the mouth, the pharynx, leading to the esophagus. Okay? Then it's going to go into our stomach. Then, like I said, we got about 23 feet of small intestines, which we'll talk about later. And then that's going to lead to our large intestines. And the large intestines kind of looks like this. I'm sorry, I'm going to erase a few things over here so that you can see things a little bit better. Okay. So this area here, where it looks like a little pocket, this is called the cecum. This little wormy thing over here, what's that? The appendix. Okay? Now food should not go this way. Okay? the food is going to go up the ascending colon, across the transverse colon, down the descending colon, and then it does this little squiggly S-shaped thing. It's called a sigmoid colon, into the rectum, and then down the poop scoop. And poop has 2 O's in it. Should you only put 1 O, it changes the word. Well, you know. Okay? Now, we'll get into it in a little bit, but the small intestines is broken down into 3 things. And it's written up, they're written up here, okay? The first 10 inches is going to be known as the duodenum. It's the first part of the small intestines, okay? The duodenum. Then it goes into something called the jejunum, which is a number of feet. And then the last part is the ileum, all right? And ileum is spelled with an E. So ileum is this, not this. Where is this located? The pelvis. This is the one that's in the digestive system. It's important. When someone says, and you diagnose ileolitis, you better make sure you're treating the right thing, right? That makes a big difference. That's why spelling counts. I kind of just think of ileum with an I, it's the hip, right? Hip has an I in it. Ileum with an E, we'll think of esophagus with an E. That's digestive system, if that works out for you, okay? And there's 1 L in both of them. So we have the ileum, which is the last part of the small intestines that goes into the large intestines. So this ileum connects to the cecum. So there's a little valve over here, a little sphincter, and that's called the ileocecal valve, or ileocecal sphincter. It allows, if that opens up, that sphincter opens up, it allows the food to go from the small intestines into the large intestines. This here, here's the ileum, here's the cecum, and there's the ileocecal valve, okay? Now, the appendix itself is a tubular structure too. You can see it. It goes into here, right? Food should not be going into there. Feces, when it reaches the large intestines, is known as fecal matter, right? Feces. The feces should go up. It shouldn't go down into this tubular structure of the appendix. But if the food has a lot of fat in it, it becomes very sluggish. So it's going to take some time, you know, when it comes into here, it's going to stay in this area for a little bit longer and then move up. In that case, some of that feces can be pushed into the appendix. The feces is loaded with bacteria. And if the feces goes in the appendix, it's going to be loaded with bacteria that's going to flourish, make more and more and more, and then this is going to, the bacteria start eating away at the appendix and make that appendix wall thinner and thinner and thinner. This can burst. If this bursts, then all that fecal matter is loaded with bacteria, goes all into the surrounding area of the intestines that should be cleared of any bacteria. It's sterile. Now you have a ruptured appendix, you're going to now be put into intensive care and hopefully you'll survive. Okay? So that's what appendicitis is all about. And there is a correlation between eating fatty foods and getting appendicitis rather. Okay? Questions about that? Okay? We don't use the appendix anymore. It's like what we call a vestigial organ. You're going to see with the pigs, when we dissect the pigs at school, they have a very large cecum that they use for storage. We don't. But we're thinking maybe when we were cavemen, the appendix was not an appendix. It was an area that we stored food in to deal with, we didn't hibernate, but I mean that we could actually use for energy for later on. Okay? But we don't use this anymore. So I would say in the next 5,000 years, we won't have appendixes, right? It's like the wisdom teeth. We don't need them there. The tailbone, we don't need that there. There's certain organs that we just don't use anymore. We call them vestigial organs that were remnants of something we probably used years and eons ago, okay? All right, so the way we break it up is the upper GI system, that's the mouth to the stomach, including the stomach, and then we have a lower GI system, which is basically small and large intestines. So if someone's going to have an upper GI series done in, let's say, diagnostics in the hospital, they're talking about anything that's going to go up until the stomach. If it's going to be a lower GI system that they're going to check, then that's what they're looking for, is small or large intestines, okay? The length, like I said, is 40 feet from the mouth to the anus, 22 feet just in the small intestines. The food timing is this. When food goes to your stomach, it stays in there for about 1 to 3 hours, depends on each person, okay? Then it takes about another 4 to 6 hours to reach the ileocecal valve. All right, so it's going to stay in the small intestines for another 4 to 6 hours. And then it takes about a total of 1 to 3 days, and it varies for each person, 1 to 3 days for it to actually pass through the digestive system. The food goes very, very slow in the large intestines. The large intestines, the water from your feces gets absorbed, so this gets very dry. And because it's so dry in the large intestines, it's going to take a longer time to move along into that tract. So what we're going to find out, and that's why we're going to see it later, is that when we look at the histology of the large intestines, we're going to see tons and tons, it's the hallmark, tons and tons of goblet cells in the large intestines. What are goblet cells? What do they secrete? Mucus. And in this case, the mucus is going to be used as lubrication. Okay, and that's what's going to be the hallmark for you to see that, yes, there's a lot of goblet cells there. We're in the large intestines. Okay. All right, so a sphincter, you know what that is. The abdominal cavity, we talked about that before. Just understand that there is no physical barrier between the pelvic cavity and the abdominal cavity. Unlike the abdominal cavity and the thoracic cavity has that diaphragm there. Okay. So if you have pneumonia, it's hard for that bacteria to get into the abdominal cavity. Can it? It can, but you'll probably be in intensive care before that happens. However, for the abdominal cavity, you have a ruptured appendix, and now you got all that fecal matter. It can go all over the fallopian tubes and destroy them. Or if you have a sexually transmitted disease that goes from the fallopian tubes, it can easily get to the liver. So keep in mind that there is no physical barrier between the pelvic and abdominal cavity, and that's why me and a lot of medical professionals would just refer to it as the abdominal pelvic cavity. Okay? Again, as I keep on saying, you just got to get this into your head, that physiology reflects anatomy. That function reflects structure. It makes sense why if you have a sexually transmitted disease, why you would have an infected liver with that. Makes sense. Okay? The abdominal regions. There's 9 regions over here. There's 4 quadrants. Just make sure you know what organs are in each. That's from chapter 1. I'm just putting it up there to be complete. Okay? All right. Really brief about this. Food names. They change the names. When the food goes into your mouth and you're chewing and putting all that saliva in there, it's known as a bolus. As it goes down the esophagus, it's still a bolus. And when it reaches your stomach, now it's going to be made into something else. In the stomach, it's going to be known as chyme. Okay? It stays as chyme throughout the whole small intestines, and when it gets into the large intestines, it's now called feces. All right? So you just have to, when you read in your lecture book, what's this chyme? What's the bolus? It's all the same thing. It just changes its name with the different contents that's in there. Okay? Questions? There's the teeth. There's the upper mouth, the tongue. No? Good. All right. Salivary glands. Okay? Let me just get this model. All right. So So we have this model, or whatever school you're at, you have something similar like this. A few things, we have three different salivary glands here, okay? Parotid gland is going to be right here. It's on the side. You can see it over here. You can use the big torsos. You can see the other. You can see it in a different perspective. Submandibular is going to be under the mandible, as the name implies. Okay, and the sublingual really can't. It's not on this model, but it's on the torsos, and you'll see it like underneath the chin. It's really underneath the tongue. That's why it's called sublingual. Lingual means tongue. Okay. So that's those on there. Those could be on the practical exam. If that's labeled, don't put down salivary gland because that would be wrong. You got to be more specific than that. Which salivary gland? Okay. All right. The pharynx. We did that all with respiratory, so I'm not going to bore you again with that. Okay. The epiglottis. We talked about that, and this is just to show you. Here's the bolus of food going down, and the epiglottis is going to come back when you swallow. The tongue, and you can feel your tongue going back. When you swallow, your tongue moves back. The epiglottis, which is this lid that connects to the tongue, when your tongue moves back, it's going to cover, this epiglottis will cover the trachea so that the bolus only has one way for it to go. Remember, it's found posterior to the trachea, the esophagus. All right, the esophagus is just a tube that goes from the mouth down to the stomach. That's all it is. There's no absorption over there. It's just a tube. Okay. The tube over there is about 10 inches long. Again, it's found posterior to the trachea. It's a gradual division where there's going to be skeletal muscle in the upper area, and there's going to be smooth muscle in the lower 2/3. So only 1/3 is skeletal muscle. Lower 2/3 is smooth muscle. Don't memorize that. Understand the concept, right? You could start a swallow, but you can't stop it. Skeletal muscle you have control about. Try it. Start a swallow right now, and then try and stop it. You can't do it because the smooth muscle takes over. All right, that's what's happening there. Okay, so the upper third is voluntary, whereas the lower 2/3 is smooth muscle. Okay, we also have two sphincters. We have an upper esophageal sphincter that you have control about. You allow what you want to go down your throat, whether it's gum or food, right? But once it's in the tube, you can't do anything. We also have a lower esophageal sphincter that actually is going to be between the stomach and the esophagus. That one you have no control about. That's what's going to control what goes into your stomach. Okay? And it's usually closed if nothing's going to be going into there, because you're going to find out there's a lot of acid in the stomach. You don't want that acid to regurgitate and go up into your esophagus. Those are all other diseases, and you've probably heard of GERD, right? G-E-R-D, which is gastroesophageal reflux disease. It goes up because you have a weak LES, right? A lower esophageal sphincter. Okay? So this is just a very schematic view. This is your striated muscle here that you have control about. The lower 2/3 you don't have any control about. There's a sphincter here, the lower esophageal sphincter, and the upper esophageal sphincter. Okay? Now the histology. There is what the epithelium is in here, besides the different muscles we just talked about, is going to be stratified squamous epithelium. It's there, as you learned from A&P1, stratified squamous epithelium is there for protection. There's a lot of layers there. When you drink hot foods or hot drinks or cold foods, you don't want to have a very thin layer there, like simple squamous epithelium. Because if that hot liquid comes down, it'll go right through that one thin layer and go right down to your deeper muscles and destroy them. So you have a very thick layer that when hot foods go in, it's there for protection. Okay? And we also have this in the mouth too. Okay? So this is what it looks like, right? Good old stratified squamous epithelium. There it is closer. All of that. It's a lot of layers there. It's not just one layer. So that's stratified squamous. It's stratified, there's a lot of layers there. It's squamous. You can't tell by all these cells here, but the way you define if it's stratified cuboidal, stratified squamous, stratified columnar, is the uppermost layer. If the uppermost layer is thin, as you can see over here, then we say it's stratified squamous. And that's how you define that. Okay? Questions about stratified squamous? Okay. All right, so let's look at the stomach, okay? Stomach, we're going to have a lot of acid there, hydrochloric acid, okay? The acid's going to help with digestion and break down the foods even further, all right? How do we get the acid there? That's what that whole reaction was about, at least one of the ways, all right? When we had to deal with carbon dioxide and water, makes carbonic acid, and then carbonic acid turns into hydrogen ions and bicarb ions. The hydrogen ions will be put in with chloride and make this, okay? So that reaction is going to be all over the place. So there's going to be chemical digestion there. It's going to help break down the foods to a more smaller chemical, all right? And then we also have mechanical digestion, and we're going to have this kind of wash machine kind of effect. There's 3 layers of muscles there. You'll learn about those in lecture, okay? And the bolus now is being converted to chyme. It's changing the consistency and the products in the stomach. So now we call it chyme, okay? And like I said, it stays in the stomach for about 1 to 3 hours, okay? So let's talk about the different parts of the stomach, because this is all fair game, and it's pretty easy to manage on this. And we got a few different models of the stomach. They're scattered around there. So you have the stomach here. And then we're going to take this and open it up. All right, so let's just, okay? So I'm not going to use this to show you. You can just figure out by my picture up here. All right? So here's the stomach. You're going to find a lot of folds inside the stomach. That's called rugae. Okay? The rugae disappear when the stomach is full. Makes sense? Right? And when the stomach empties, then you see the rugae. We also have rugae in the vagina. We also have rugae in the urinary bladder. Okay? So the rugae in the vagina, when a baby comes through, the rugae disappear. When the baby comes out, the rugae's back there. All right? So that's what that is. They're trying to show you different layers of the muscles. There's 3 different layers. Okay? And that helps with this mechanical digestion happening, like a wash machine would do. There's the esophagus. The first part of the stomach is called the cardiac area, the cardia. Not too sure why. It's not the uppermost area. The uppermost area is this. This is the most superior area of the stomach. This is how it sits in your body. This area is called the fundus. You'll see the word fundus quite often with other words. The fundus of the urinary bladder, the fundus of the uterus. Okay, it's the most superior portion of an organ. Then you're going to have the major body of the stomach. You'll have an antrum over here, and then you'll have the pylorus over here. Okay? We have a sphincter here. The sphincter is not shown here, but the sphincter over here is what? We talked about it. The lower esophageal sphincter. We also have a sphincter over here. That's called the pyloric sphincter. And that kind of makes sense because here's the pylorus. That leads to the small intestines. Remember, the first part of small intestines is the duodenum. You can say duodenum or duodenum. Same thing. Caribbean or Caribbean. I don't know. It's both the same. So anyway, you got the sphincter here. So when this closes and this closes, then the stomach could actually churn this thing. Beautiful. It won't go up, it won't go out. That's what you want. Okay? We also have 2 curvatures. There's one curvature here called the lesser curvature. And we have another curvature over here that's called the greater curvature. Okay? Questions on that? I think the anatomy is not so bad on the digestive system. Okay? Now, we have something called omentums. There's a lesser omentum and greater omentum. The lesser omentum, and I'll show you pictures of this, is a fatty pad that connects the lesser curvature of the stomach to the liver. All right? If I went back to this picture, it's a small fatty pad that comes from here and extends to the liver. Okay? Then we have another fatty pad that comes off the greater curvature of the stomach and drapes down. This thing is called the greater omentum. It drapes down like an apron, covers all the intestines down here, and then it fuses with itself as it comes right back up, but now it attaches to the transverse colon. Okay? I'll show you what I mean by that. But you have this big thing that's going to do this. It's loaded with fat. Okay? Usually it's about this thin. but I have seen it this thin. Okay? This is what creates the bear belly on people. It's loaded with fat. Okay? This is what really adds weight to a person's body. When someone has that pot belly kind of thing, I kind of have it. Won't say anything. But I kind of have it. It's that pot belly that happens over here. It's because of this. It's loaded with triglycerides and fats, adipose tissue. Okay? And in fact, if I walked into an OR, an operating room, and I didn't know what they were doing, I could go by smell though. Because when you cut through this omentum and you use a cautery machine where you burn things, all right, to make sure that the blood vessels don't hemorrhage, you cut through this with a cautery and you'll see smoke coming out, and it smells like bacon. It literally smells like bacon, okay? But that's what's going on with this. And I told you about the root gate. So here's the lesser omentum that connects the lesser curvature of the stomach with the liver. The greater omentum, this is showing it very thin, but I have seen it really thick over here. It comes off the greater curvature of the stomach, it comes down and drapes over the intestines, the small intestines. And now just keep your eye on here, it's the only animation I can do here. If we lift this up, it attaches to the transverse colon. Does that make sense? So it comes down off the greater omentum, and then it attaches to the transverse colon when it comes back up. All right, so it's a double wall, so it's our double layer, this greater omentum. Okay? Questions about that? Okay? There's also mesentery that's all in here, and that attaches to the intestines. In the mesenteries, you will have big, major blood vessels. And I think you guys know what they are, right? Branches off the superior and inferior mesenteric arteries. These we don't have major blood vessels in. This we do, all right? So stomach histology, all right? There's an extra layer of muscle on there. Usually we only have 2 layers of muscle, something called longitudinal and circular muscles. That's going to help the food move forward, something we call peristalsis. But when you add another layer to this in an oblique or an angle, then this actually doesn't make the food move forward, but it actually creates this washing machine kind of thing, the mechanical digestion, okay? So what we have here is that from the stomach all the way down to the rectum, the epithelium is now changed to something called simple columnar epithelium. Okay, no more stratified squamous. It's now simple columnar epithelium, and you'll also have goblet cells located in each one of these areas. There'll be a lot of goblet cells in the stomach, but they're there for a different reason. Your stomach's going to make a lot of acid, hydrochloric acid, which has a pH of 2. You put a drop of hydrochloric acid on your hand, it comes out the other end. Okay, it's very strong. So therefore, if your stomach's going to produce a lot of and secrete a lot of this hydrochloric acid in the lumen of the stomach, you don't want this acid to digest its own stomach. So we are going to produce a very thick alkaline mucus around as a border or a layer of mucus, so that the hydrochloric acid, when it goes in the stomach, it's not going to digest your stomach itself. Does that make sense? All right, so that's why we have it in there. All right, so you have these goblet cells that go there. Then we have these gastric pits. And what a gastric pit is, let me see if I got the picture here. The gastric pits are this. They're microscopic, and this is what we're going to see when we look on the microscope. But one gastric pit will be like this. And there's thousands of these gastric pits in the stomach. And there's going to be cells lining this, simple columnar epithelium. Okay? Nuclei is down by the base of each one of these cells. You saw an a01, blah, blah, blah. Okay? And we usually have a lot of the goblet cells located in the neck of the gastric pit. All right, so there's a few simple columnar epithelium there, okay? And then you're going to have other cells in here. And so you have mucous surface cells. These are your goblet cells. They're also known as the neck cells, okay? They're going to produce those mucus. Then we're going to have other cells in here, like these are called parietal cells. And they're scattered down here. These are the ones that are going to make hydrochloric acid. So these parietal cells have carbonic anhydrase that we talked about were respiratory. They're the ones that are going to get the hydrogens into the lumen. They're also going to produce intrinsic factor from what you learned about in hematology. When you take in vitamin B12 that's needed to make a red blood cell, vitamin B12 in your diet cannot get absorbed into your bloodstream unless it rides on this intrinsic factor. Once it attaches to intrinsic factor, now it can get absorbed into your bloodstream. So if you have a partial gastrectomy, in other words, part of your stomach gets removed for whatever reason, you can become anemic because we are losing some of the sources of intrinsic factor, which means now you can't, the vitamin B12 that comes into your stomach isn't going to get into the bloodstream, so you can't make red blood cells. So they may need to get needles of vitamin B12. They get absorbed into your bloodstream from the muscle. But if it's dietary vitamin B12, it needs intrinsic factor. Okay? You also have other cells called chief cells. And they're going to be located also around here too. Okay? So the chief cells are going to produce an enzyme called pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is an inactive form that becomes pepsin in the presence of hydrochloric acid. So if there's hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen, the pepsinogen gets activated to become pepsin, and pepsin is the enzyme to break down proteins, to get them into smaller, simpler products. What are simpler products of proteins? Amino acids, bingo, okay? Because the proteins are just too damn big to get into your bloodstream, so they have to be broken down into smaller products, amino acids, and now the amino acids can get in there, okay? So that's what's going to happen there, all right? And that's, by the way, how they came up with the word Pepsi. They took the stomach from cows, and they crumble it all up, and they make Pepsi with it. That's a joke. I'm just joking. All right? How's it going, though, all right? All right, and then you also have other cells called enteroendocrine cells. Oh, you thought you were done with the endocrine system. No. All right, there's actually 3 other hormones throughout the digestive system that you're going to learn about. So just add them to your chart. One of them is called gastrin. Gastrin is a hormone, so that means it does not put its secretion into a lumen, right? It's not like there's a duct there. So instead, these cells over here, which are still located in the areas over here, okay, but they're just not going to put its secretion into the lumen here. These are going to go, and you'll have blood vessels all around here too. So its secretion is going to go right into the bloodstream. That's what a hormone is. That's the definition of a hormone, that it gets secreted right into a bloodstream. This is going to stimulate more hydrochloric acid to come out and more pepsinogen to come out. It's going to help that. So it's kind of a weird thing because gastrin comes out of a cell here, goes into the bloodstream only to target a parietal cell that's back over here. All right, let alone the chief cell too for pepsinogen. All right, so that's how that works. Okay, and what it does is that all the things, not the G cells, but all the chief cells, parietal cells, and the mucus, they're all going to put in all its secretions into this gastric pit. And when it does, It's going to get all mixed into this gastric pit, and then you're going to have all this stuff go out into the lumen of the stomach. That's how it's all set up. Okay? So that's basically what I just drew for you. You can see all these different cells in here, and it puts everything into the gastric pit. And then it goes into the lumen of the stomach. Okay? So here's wonderful gastric pits. You can see them going like this. You look at this and you know you're in the stomach. There's nothing else that looks like that. Okay? So the gastric pit in here. You can see all the simple columnar epitheliums. I will not ask you, can you define between or identify a chief cell versus a parietal cell. You can't tell from here. And most of the stuff that I just talked about over here is not even going to be asked in lab. I just kind of did that to explain to you what a gastric pit is. In lecture, boy, there's a lot of questions they could ask you about. All right? But I kind of did that for you now. All right? Any questions about that? All right? So here's the gastric pit over here, and here's a schematic view of it. All right? Pretty easy, right? I think so. The anatomy's not too bad.